At 10:52 p.m. on a Friday night in March, a young woman named Renee Kowalski locked the front door of the Blue Plate Diner, flipped the sign to closed, and did what she'd done almost every night for 2 years. She started wiping down the counter, humming along to whatever was playing on the kitchen radio. 8 minutes later, the diner's only remaining employee, a 19-year-old dishwasher named Tommy, stepped out of the walk-in freezer to find the front door standing wide open. The rain was blowing in sideways across the linoleum. Renee's car keys were still sitting on the counter next to her purse. Renee was gone. No sign of forced entry, no sign of a struggle. Just an open door, letting the storm in, and a half-wiped counter with the rag still lying where she dropped it. 19 years later, Renee Kowalski has never been found. No body, no confirmed sighting, no explanation. Just one final customer, glimpsed on grainy security footage minutes before she vanished. A customer whose face has never been identified, and whose presence in that diner that night remains, to this day, completely unexplained. This is the story of the last night anyone ever saw Renee Kowalski. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the detective who spent a decade on this case still calls it the one ghost I never managed to put to rest. Welcome back to Shelby's Den, the place where we dig into the cases that never made national headlines, but absolutely should have. If you're new here, we cover unsolved mysteries, cold cases, and stories that fell through the cracks of true crime coverage. So if that's your thing, hit subscribe and ring that bell, because we've got a lot more of these coming. Now, let's get back to the story. To understand what happened to Renee Kowalski, you need to understand the place she vanished from, because the Blue Plate Diner wasn't some anonymous truck stop off a highway. It was the kind of small-town institution where everybody, and I mean everybody, was a regular. The diner sat on the edge of Millbrook Junction, a town of about 6,000 people, at the intersection of two state routes that saw more farm trucks than tourists. It had been open since the 1970s, passed down through 2 generations of the same family, and by the time Renee started working there at 19 years old, it functioned less like a restaurant and more like the town's unofficial living room. Renee had grown up in Millbrook Junction her entire life. Co-workers and regulars alike described her the same way: warm, quick with a joke, fiercely protective of her younger brother, and saving up, carefully, methodically, for community college 2 towns over. She kept a jar behind the counter labeled tuition, and regulars would sometimes toss their spare change into it as a running joke that had become something close to a town tradition. On the night she disappeared, Renee was closing alone with Tommy Vance, the dishwasher, who was in the back for most of the final hour cleaning the kitchen. This wasn't unusual. The diner typically had a skeleton crew after 9 p.m., since Friday nights rarely brought more than a handful of late stragglers. According to the diner's own reconstructed timeline, based on register receipts and Tommy's statement, the last normal customers, a retired couple who came in most Fridays for pie, left at 10:31 p.m. Renee locked the door behind them per her usual routine, even though official closing time was 11 o'clock, because the diner rarely got walk-ins that late anyway. Except that night, it did. At 10:38 p.m., 7 minutes after Renee locked the door, the diner's single security camera mounted behind the register, mostly there to deter till theft, captured something that has haunted this case for 19 years. A man walks up to the locked front door. He doesn't knock loudly, doesn't bang on the glass. He simply raises a hand and taps twice, almost politely. And Renee, visible on the same grainy footage, walks over and lets him in. She didn't call out for Tommy. She didn't hesitate. She unlocked the door for a man after closing alone and let him inside. That single decision is where this mystery truly begins. The security footage from the Blue Plate Diner was, by 2000 standards, already outdated technology. A single fixed camera, black and white, low frame rate, positioned to catch the register rather than the dining room. It was never meant to identify faces. It was meant to catch someone reaching into the till. Which means that on the night Renee Kowalski vanished, the one piece of visual evidence investigators had access to shows almost everything except what they needed most: the man's face. Here's what we do know from the footage, which was enhanced twice over the years, once shortly after the disappearance, and once again 9 years later using updated forensic video software. The man appears to be an adult, likely between 30 and 50 based on posture and build, of average height, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low enough that, combined with the angle of the camera, his face is never once clearly visible in any frame across the entire 11 minutes he's on screen. He sits in the corner booth, the one furthest from the counter and, notably, the one furthest from the camera's effective range. Renee brings him a cup of coffee. The security footage shows this exchange at 10:41 p.m., and the two appear to talk for several minutes. Investigators have long debated whether this exchange looked like she recognized him or was simply being polite to a stranded stranger. At 10:47 p.m., Renee walks toward the kitchen, presumably to check on Tommy or grab something, and is out of frame for roughly 90 seconds. At 10:49 p.m., she returns to the dining room. The man is still seated. At 10:52 p.m., the same time she was later confirmed to have locked the front door and started wiping the counter. According to Tommy's independently corroborated account, the man rises from the booth. He does not appear to pay. He walks toward the door. And then, at 10 hours 52 minutes and 41 seconds p.m., he walks directly underneath the camera, out of its downward-facing range, and is never seen on the footage again. 8 minutes later, Tommy finds the front door open and Renee gone. Investigators immediately zeroed in on this figure as the case's central, unavoidable focus, and yet, in 19 years, he has never been identified. No one in Millbrook Junction recognized him from the footage. He wasn't a known regular. Nobody could place his vehicle because, and this detail has always bothered investigators, no unfamiliar car was reported parked near the diner that night, despite the gravel lot being otherwise empty after 10:30 p.m., which raises an uncomfortable question that's never been resolved. If he didn't drive there, how did he arrive? And if he did drive, where exactly did he leave the car? Let's talk about those 90 seconds. Because for a lot of investigators who worked this case, that gap when Renee stepped into the kitchen while the mystery man remained alone in the dining room has always felt like the single most important unanswered moment in the entire timeline. Tommy Vance, the dishwasher, gave a statement that night and has never wavered from it in 19 years of follow-up interviews. He says Renee came into the kitchen briefly around that time, grabbed a rag from the shelf near the walk-in, and said something to the effect of, "Weird night, huh?" A comment Tommy took at the time as an offhand remark about the rain rather than anything specific about the man out front. Crucially, Tommy told investigators he never actually saw the man himself. He was elbow-deep in dishwater with his back to the pass-through window for most of that final hour. And he says Renee never mentioned the customer by name or in any way that suggested alarm. This detail is significant because it tells us something important. Whatever happened between Renee and that man, it apparently didn't frighten her enough to say anything to her coworker, even when she had a clear, private 90-second opportunity to do exactly that. Which leads to one of the case's two dominant theories, both of which investigators have wrestled with for nearly 2 decades. Theory 1. Renee didn't recognize any danger because there wasn't any to recognize. At least, not yet. The man was someone unfamiliar to her, perhaps a stranded traveler or someone with a plausible reason to be let in. And whatever happened suddenly, likely just outside the diner, in the roughly 8 minutes between his exit and Tommy's discovery of the open door. Theory 2. Renee did recognize the man, not as a stranger, but as someone she knew or at least knew of, and her lack of alarm reflected familiarity rather than naivety. Under this theory, her offhand weird night comment wasn't about the rain at all. It was about him. Investigators leaned hard into Theory 2 for a period during the initial investigation, largely because of one additional piece of testimony that surfaced roughly 3 weeks after Renee's disappearance, and which remains one of the case's most debated pieces of evidence to this day. 3 weeks after Renee vanished, her younger brother, Danny, then 16 years old, found something while cleaning out her room at their parents' request, a decision the family had put off as long as they could bear to, still holding out hope she'd simply walk back through the front door. Tucked inside a paperback novel on her nightstand, Danny found a folded piece of notebook paper, a partially written letter, undated, addressed to no one by name, that read in part, "I don't know how to say this without sounding crazy, but I think someone's been watching the diner. Not every night. Just sometimes. I told myself it was nothing, but then last week." The letter cuts off mid-sentence. It was never finished. There's no indication of who Renee intended to give it to, or whether she intended to give it to anyone at all. It may simply have been her working through her own unease on paper, a habit her mother confirmed she'd had since childhood, of writing things down to make sense of them. This letter became, almost overnight, the emotional and investigative centerpiece of the case. If Renee genuinely believed someone had been watching the diner in the weeks before her disappearance, it suggested premeditation, that the man who tapped on the glass that Friday night wasn't a random stranger seeking shelter from the rain, but someone who'd been observing her and the diner's closing routine for some time. Detectives combed back through months of the diner's limited security footage, looking for any earlier appearance of a similarly dressed figure lingering near the property. They found 2 possible matches, a man in a dark jacket visible in the far edge of frame on 2 separate nights roughly 5 and 8 weeks prior. Both times positioned near the tree line across the state route from the diner's parking lot. Neither time clear enough to confirm identity or even confirm it was the same person twice. It's tantalizing evidence. It's also frustratingly inconclusive evidence, enough to support the watching theory, but never enough to prove it beyond doubt. Renee's family, notably, has always maintained that she never mentioned feeling unsafe to any of them directly. No comment to her mother, no offhand remark to her brother, nothing that would have prompted anyone to take action before it was too late. Whatever unease she was working through in that letter, she appears to have kept almost entirely to herself. Which, for a detective trying to build a case 19 years later, leaves us with a deeply painful kind of evidence, proof that something was wrong, with almost no additional detail about what or who. The search for Renee Kowalski began within hours of Tommy's 911 call and, at its peak roughly 10 days later, involved over 200 volunteers combing the wooded areas, drainage ditches, and farmland surrounding Millbrook Junction. State police brought in cadaver dogs. A local pond was drained. The search extended along both state routes for nearly 6 miles in either direction. Nothing was found. No clothing, no personal items, no physical trace of Renee Kowalski was ever recovered. Not that night, not in the following weeks, and not in the 19 years since. despite periodic searches conducted whenever new information, however thin, surfaced. With no body and no physical evidence, investigators turned to the standard toolkit: motive, opportunity, and relationships. Renee's boyfriend at the time, a young man named Curtis Hawley, was investigated extensively in the first months of the case, as is standard procedure with any missing person who has a romantic partner. Curtis had an alibi. He was at a friend's house roughly 40 minutes away, corroborated by 3 separate witnesses, and, notably, a phone call he made from that friend's landline at 10:44 p.m. Squarely within the window, Renee was seen with the mystery man on camera. This alibi has held up under every subsequent review of the case and effectively removed him as a suspect. Though online true crime communities have, at various points over the years, unfairly resurrected suspicion around him, something Curtis, now in his 40s, has spoken about publicly with visible frustration. A former diner employee, fired 8 months prior to Renee's disappearance under contentious circumstances involving accusations of till theft, was also investigated. He had, according to 2 witnesses, made a vague comment at a local bar roughly a month before the disappearance about getting back at the diner's owners. Detectives interviewed him extensively. He denied any involvement, submitted voluntarily to police questioning multiple times, and was never charged, as investigators found no physical evidence connecting him to the scene and no clear match to the mystery man's build in the available footage. He passed away 11 years ago, and with him went whatever knowledge, if any, he might have carried. A regional pattern was raised roughly 6 years after Renee's disappearance, when a cold case researcher noted similarities between this case and 2 other unsolved disappearances of young women from small towns within a 90-mile radius, both involving a rural business closing alone at night. Neither case was ever definitively linked to Renee's, and state police have publicly stated there is insufficient evidence to connect them, though the theory remains a persistent thread in true crime discussions of this case to this day. None of these threads has ever produced an arrest, a named person of interest, or a conclusive answer. The man in the booth, the one clear lead investigators had, was simply never identified. 19 years on, the Blue Plate Diner case, often shortened online to just the last customer, remains one of the most discussed unsolved disappearances in true crime circles. And it spawned no shortage of theories, some grounded, some far less so. The stranded traveler theory is the simplest explanation, and the one investigators initially treated as most likely. A man, caught in the storm, sought shelter, and something went catastrophically, tragically wrong in the moments after Renee let him in. A random act of violence with no prior connection between them at all. This theory is deeply unsettling precisely because of its randomness, but it struggles to explain the letter and the 2 possible earlier sightings near the tree line in the weeks before. The Watcher theory, built directly around Renee's unfinished letter, holds that the man had been surveilling the diner for weeks, learning Renee's closing routine, and used the storm as convenient cover for a plan that had already been in motion for some time. This theory accounts for more of the evidence, but leans heavily on 2 inconclusive pieces of grainy footage that were never confirmed to show the same person. The insider theory suggests the man wasn't a stranger at all, but someone from Millbrook Junction whom Renee recognized, which would explain both her calm demeanor on camera and her lack of alarm when speaking to Tommy. Proponents of this theory point to the polite, restrained knock on the door as evidence of familiarity rather than desperation. Critics point out that if this were true, in a town as small and tightly connected as Millbrook Junction, it seems remarkable that not a single resident ever recognized the figure on the enhanced footage over 19 years. though supporters countered that the footage quality may simply be too poor for recognition regardless of familiarity. A more recent theory, gaining traction in the last several years largely through online true crime communities, focuses on the missing vehicle question, the fact that no unfamiliar car was ever reported near the diner that night. Some researchers have proposed the man may have arrived on foot from somewhere within walking distance, which would narrow his likely origin to a handful of nearby properties along the state route, several of which were, in fact, canvassed at the time without producing any leads. Whether this was ever pursued as thoroughly as it could have been remains a point of frustration for people who followed this case closely for years. What virtually everyone who has studied this case agrees on, regardless of which theory they favor, is this: the man in the booth held the key to what happened that night, and in 19 years, he has never been found, named, or explained. The Blue Plate Diner itself closed for good 6 years after Renee's disappearance. Business had slowed considerably in the years following. Some longtime regulars said the atmosphere never recovered, that the diner always felt a little haunted after that night, whether anyone said so out loud or not. The building has changed hands twice since and currently sits vacant, though the original neon sign, remarkably, still hangs above the door. Renee's case remains officially open, classified as an unsolved disappearance rather than a confirmed homicide, though investigators have privately acknowledged for years that they hold little hope she is still alive. She was declared legally deceased 12 years after her disappearance, a decision her family has described as one of the hardest they've ever had to make, made necessary only by practical legal matters rather than any sense of closure. Danny, her younger brother, now in his mid-30s, has become something of an advocate for the case over the years, periodically sharing updates and appeals for information through a memorial social media page dedicated to his sister. In an interview given on the 15th anniversary of her disappearance, he said, "I don't need the person to go to prison for me to feel better. I just need to know what happened to her. I need to stop imagining 100 different versions of that night." The enhanced security footage, along with the unfinished letter, remains part of the active case file, periodically re-examined whenever advances in forensic video technology make a new pass worthwhile. As recently as 3 years ago, the footage underwent another round of digital enhancement. Though investigators have publicly stated the results did not yield any new identifying detail beyond what was already known. Tommy Vance, the dishwasher who found the open door that night, still lives in Millbrook Junction. Now, in his late 30s, he's spoken publicly only rarely about that night. But in one interview marking the case's 10th anniversary, he said something that stayed with a lot of people who followed this case closely ever since. "I think about those 90 seconds all the time. If I'd just come out of that kitchen 2 minutes earlier, maybe I'd have seen his face. Maybe none of this would still be a mystery. I carry that. I don't think I'll ever put it down." So here's where this case leaves us, 19 years later. A young woman well-liked, careful, saving for a future she never got to have, makes one small decision, unlocking a door for a man after closing, and is never seen again. A single grainy camera catches everything except the one detail that matters most. A half-finished letter hints at fear she never fully explained to anyone. And a man in a dark jacket and a low baseball cap walks out from under a security camera and out of recorded history entirely. Was Renee Kowalski the victim of a random storm-driven tragedy? Was she being watched for weeks by someone patient enough to wait for exactly the right moment? Or is the truth something that Millbrook Junction, a town small enough that everyone still, to this day, half expects to recognize that face if they ever see it again, has been standing next to for 19 years without ever realizing it? I want to hear your theory. Drop it in the comments. And if you know a mystery you think deserves the Shelby's Den treatment, let us know that too. Because cases like this one are exactly why this channel exists. If you enjoyed this original mystery story, like the video, subscribe for more, and turn on notifications for future psychological thrillers, unsolved mysteries, and fictional true crime-inspired tales. Until next time, sleep carefully.